There we go.
Thank you.
No worries.
Good. So I'm Leah. I'm a fourth year education student. I'm from Prince Albert. My major is art and my minor is math.
My name is Jessica. I'm also a fourth year early education student. My major is math and my minor is physical education, and I'm from Tabor, Alberta.
My name is Reese. I am from Hannah, Alberta. I am also a fourth year education student, and my major was English and my minor was social science.
My name is Josh. I am also from Alberta, Sylvan Lake. I'm a secondary student in this last year. My major is social and my minor is English.
My name is Jackson. I'm from Saskatoon here. I'm an fourth year early education student, and my major is art or English. My minor is art. My goodness.
And my name is Kepler, and I am from British Columbia, a small town called Caslow. I'm a secondary teaching student as well as Josh. And my major is history and minor is drama. Get the mouse out.
I guess so. I have no way of changing the slide on here though.
Use the arrow keys
Okay.
on the keyboard.
Nope.
We got sound, but no movement now.
Yeah.
Straight up.
Like a radio play. Oh, there we go.
Oh,
Did that go the right way?
Wrong way.
wrong way.
There you go.
Okay, so just
There we
click
go.
to the side then. All right. Yeah. Okay, so before diving into our project and the data that we found, we would first like to provide some insight on some of the terminology we will be using during this presentation. Some of this terminology will be important for understanding what we learned as students and educators, such as our first term, which is inquiry, which is the act of asking information and finding the answer through official investigation. The next term, pedagogy, is the method and practice of teaching. The remaining terms will play a key role in understanding the science and data that we collected. So to analyze our samples, we used a scanning electron microscope, which is an electron microscope that is used to scan the surface of a specimen, or in our case, eggshells, using electrons that are reflected to form an image. Another term we will use in our presentation is spectroscopy, which is a branch of science that measures the bands of light and spectra produced when matter interacts with electromagnetic radiation. The last term we will discuss is relative dentin abrasion. This is a standardized scale developed by the American Dental Association to quantify the abrasive effects of toothpaste on tooth dentin.
All right, so regarding our inquiry for this project, our main question was, how do the particulates in different toothpastes affect the structure of an eggshell? Our original hypothesis was that toothpaste with particulates will cause more damage to the surface of an eggshell. The reason we chose eggshells for this project was because eggshells are made of calcium carbonate, which is similar to tooth enamel and the makeup of a tooth. Originally, we thought that whitening and charcoal toothpaste that would contain abrasives and would wear the surface of the shell down. And regular toothpaste would focus on protection and be less abrasive. Our expected outcome was that whitening and charcoal toothpaste would do worse at protecting the enamel, or the eggshell in this case. There you go. We also want to highlight the connection between oral health and Indigenous rights. In Call to Action number 19, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission states, "We call upon the federal government to establish measurable goals to identify and close the gaps in health outcomes between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal communities. These efforts focus on issues such as chronic diseases, access to appropriate health services, and overall well-being." So how does this connect to our research? In many remote Indigenous communities, access to dental care is limited. When people rely on highly abrasive toothpaste like charcoal or whitening formulas, combined with limited access this may lead to a higher rate of chronic dental issues. We can advocate for better access to dental care. We can promote culturally relevant oral health education. And finally, we can support policy changes that fund dental care programs.
Now, when we first started this inquiry project, we were all quite overwhelmed since none of us came from a research or a science background. This is where our professor modeled what our future students need from us. She gave us a safe space to express our worries and concerns, and she also reassured us throughout the course that our feelings are normal, it all comes with stepping outside of your comfort zone, and it will all work out in the end. Next, when we were clarifying our research question, there were so many possibilities we could choose from, and this is where we really learned remembering the meaning and the purpose of your research. We want to teach our future students that our research isn't only important for us, but it's also important for those around us. We're going to be sharing our research with our group members, but also people around us in our communities. So making sure that our research is relevant for our communities around us. And next, we learned creating a positive environment starts on day one. We passed around a talking stick in our first class and just connected to each other and talked about how we were feeling. This established some really great communication and connection within our group, and it really proved useful throughout the process because it is a very collaborative process, and our communication from day one really helped us succeed in that way.
All right, so regarding our procedure, the steps that we took, we started in the lab. We prepped our samples by rinsing the egg, cutting it into pieces. We brushed each of the eggshell samples with toothpaste for 1 minute. We had the same person brush all of the eggshells. And then we rinsed each egg in the same way using the same amount of water with a pipette. Then we went to the scanning electron microscope. We took each piece from the exact center of the egg, or as close as we could get to it. And then Josh and Reese prepped the samples for the microscope. And then Burke helped us analyze the data by capturing the images for us. Then we later examined the spectra, and we researched on our own the toothpaste ingredients so that we could make our own conclusions. Now, regarding the variables in this experiment, our independent variable was the type of toothpaste. We used 3 different kinds: regular, whitening, and charcoal. Our dependent variable was the effect on the eggshell, if there was visible damage, if it was weakened, things like that. Our controlled variables were the size and the type of shell, the amount of toothpaste that we used, the exposure time, and the environmental conditions such as the temperature in the room. And then the materials that we provided for this experiment were 3 different kinds of toothpaste, the eggshells, the applicators for the toothpaste, and the toothbrushes. And our hope to, what we were hoping to find for this experiment was how different toothpastes affect the strength and structure of the eggshell. And we were wondering if whitening and charcoal do in fact cause more damage, and regular toothpaste does strengthen and protect. So what did we use? We used a scanning electron microscope, also the SEM, to capture high-resolution images of the eggshells after brushing. SEM works by directing a focused beam of electrons onto the surface of a sample. Because electrons have much shorter wavelengths than light, this techniques allow us to see microscopic details, far beyond what a regular light microscope can show. This helped us observe how different toothpaste formulas affect the shell's surface. We also use spectroscopy, which is the study of how light interacts with matter. This technique helped us determine the elemental composition of the toothpaste samples by analyzing the light absorbed or emitted from the surface. In our case, we focused on detecting elements like silica, a common abrasive ingredient in toothpaste, and compared concentrations between types of paste.
So our procedural reflections. In the recording of our procedure, we learned that this was very important for recollecting what our process was and how it was completed. They also help to keep us organized throughout the entire process and inquiry. Additionally, these recordings help to keep us, sorry, I've lost my spot. Knowing this will help us, this will help, I apologize, guys, give me a second here.
Yeah.
Knowing this will help us as future educators as we guide students through the inquiry process and teach them about the importance of recording data and how it will benefit them in the future. Another thing we learned is the importance of collaboration and community and how this affects the inquiry process. By establishing effective communication right from the start, we were able to delegate roles and continue and make sure that all of this was done in a timely manner. Another important aspect of this communication is how it helped us to grow together and create a positive and supportive and safe classroom space, which we would strive which we will strive to create as future teachers. Before beginning this process, we were also very intimidated by completing an inquiry process and having to do the formal science. I'm so sorry.
It's okay. Take a breath.
I'm very ill. Okay.
So just as many of you know, although these people will be fine with a group of their students, when you're presenting to peers and colleagues, it is much harder. So just kind of give a moment to take a breath.
Okay. Before beginning this process, we were all very intimidated by completing an inquiry process without having any formal science background. Then finding out that we were doing this at the CLS and in front of you guys added another very intimidating factor. However, as we worked through this process and through the guidance of Tracy and Burke, we were able to become more comfortable and confident in our abilities. This will help us as future educators as we work to push our students to work through this process and to step outside of their comfort zones and to become more comfortable in difficult situations such as this. I need to switch the slide.
All right, so initially, we did not find what we were hoping to find with our initial hypothesis. That being said, we did find some information that was useful to us and that was interesting to us. So the three findings that we ended up coming up with were the differences in silica concentration. We ended up using spectroscopy data to support our own individual research and our own conclusions. And then the adhesion of the toothpaste to the eggshell samples and potentially how they would adhere to teeth as well. So.
All right, perfect. So we already talked a little bit about RDA before. Again, that's relative dentin abrasion, just for a brief recap. On the right there, that is an image of an example. There's not just one RDA scale, but they all use the same measurement. Some super important things to point out here that are applicable to our kind of experiment is right up there. One of the lowest RDA values is a toothbrush with plain water. So that's what we did with our control egg, just to get a good baseline. Another super important thing to pay attention to is the color ranking. So 0 to 70, low abrasive, 71 to 100, medium, and then just keeps going higher and higher. Yellow, about up to 150 is about the max safe amount of dentin abrasion you want for a toothpaste, and anything above that is pretty dangerous. So it's important to also notice that there's a lot of different whitening ones, like there's a Colgate Total Whitening, Crest Sensitive Whitening, Crest Pro Health Whitening. So it could be kind of a little bit of misinformation too. Like if you're looking for a whitening toothpaste, you might be getting one that's in a dangerous zone versus one that's, I don't know, maybe more medium abrasive or highly abrasive. Okay, anyways, we talked about how the RDA value is aligned with higher silica concentration. We expected to find the more abrasive toothpaste like charcoal and silica to contain more abrasive particles. Along with that, we captured images of different eggs and tried to examine the surface to see if we could pick up any sort of surface damage or stuff left behind that may indicate evidence of abrasion. In our process, like was mentioned before, we use the SEM and spectroscopy to capture very, very high def images, both of the egg, toothpaste, and of the elements that were on that as well. And we hope to connect, kind of, like I said before, toothpaste ingredients, RDA value, and silica present. So moving on to our first picture here. So this is a very, very small sample of regular toothpaste that we took. A couple important things to pay attention in this image here is it's measured in microns. For those who don't know, microns are very, very small measurement scale. A human hair is about 50 to 100 microns thick. So just for scale, we're measuring this at about 10 microns. This is a very, very small piece of regular toothpaste. You'll notice a lot of black sort of empty space around here. We did mount all of our stuff on the carbon tape, all of our samples. So all of that black you see in the background is just the carbon tape, which is also why I didn't necessarily feel like measuring for carbon here, because the whole back part would just blow up and you wouldn't get to see all the pretty reds and blues. So as we're going through the different paste, I'll provide a color legend. All of the red dots you see are calcium and the blue dots would be magnesium. When we were researching the ingredients, we noticed that this lined up. Calcium and magnesium both help protect the tooth surface and prevent like erosion or plaque buildup. And the lack of silicone captured in this image too kind of helps prove our hypothesis and as well aligns with the lower RDA ranking. So our regular toothpaste that we use, we found that it had an RDA ranking of 68. So that's more on the safe side than say the 100s or the 150s. Okay, and moving on to the next one. This one's a little bit more exciting. You may think it's a Jackson Pollock painting, but this is actually an image we captured of our charcoal toothpaste. So there's quite a bit more going on here. First of all, you'll notice, again, we're measuring it in 10 microns, so same scale as the other one. A whole explosion of red all around here. So that red is our concentration of silica. This kind of caught us by surprise, or at least me at first, because I expected all of these larger sort of parts to be what the silica was. But if we look back at the color scale, we can actually see those are calcium particulates within the paste there. So when we first saw it without any colors, we thought, oh, it looks pointy. That must be the abrasive agent. But it turns out the silica is a lot more spread out through the paste. So along with the silica and calcium, we have sulfur and carbon. What's super cool, what I noticed about carbon is you'll notice I didn't really bring it up on the first one, but charcoal and carbon are very, very closely intertwined. I'm sure most of you know in a combustion reaction, carbon is a byproduct. So charcoal, I don't know, when in basic terms, pretty much just burnt wood, a lot of the time burnt byproducts. So yeah, the charcoal in there, or the carbon in there rather, sorry, aligns with what we know about charcoal. And again, with the silica present, that brings its RDA value up a little higher, about to 98.6. So teetering on that sort of highly sort of abrasive limit there. And on to our last one. So whitening, there's a lot more colors too. What's important on this one, we measured it slightly lower at 20 microns there. So you might notice the colors are a bit more spread out. That's why we think they look a little more spread out. But just like the charcoal one, some other interesting things to acknowledge. The silicone in red is mostly spread out through the paste, whereas the phosphorus and the magnesium are concentrated in these big chunks here. And again, phosphorus and magnesium work together to increase tooth health and protect against erosion, rebuild enamel, and all that good stuff. So the silica particulates were higher in number here. Even though it's zoomed out further, there's still a whole bunch of red we noticed. And based on our research, it does have the highest RDA value at 168.2. So if we're looking at comparing silica to RDA and abrasiveness, we originally made the conclusion that this would be the most abrasive or have the most silica. Where'd the mouse go? Uh-oh.
That blue dot was the mouse.
That blue dot was the mouse? I might have lost it.
Is it on the? You have to move it off the side of the screen.
Oh, gotta move it off the side. Right. Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
Oh boy. All right. So now we're going to move on to toothpaste adhesion. So that's the kind of second part of what we were trying to find. On the right there, you'll see just a captured image of our control egg. Important things to notice, all of these stress fractures here, those are not due to the brushing, but just how, I guess, an egg looks under a microscope. And it is all green because it is mainly composed of calcium. So our original ideas, we were looking for the thickest paste would be like have the greatest adhesive property. And then in turn, the greater adhesion, the greater the damage to the eggshell. So yeah, the more it sticks to the egg when you're brushing, the more it would theoretically abrade the surface. So we expected to find certain particulates left behind, mostly silica on the eggshell, and higher viscosity, like I said, leading to higher concentration of that. And yeah, the control egg, we thought it would be useful to capture just so we could compare what it looks like the control versus when the pastes are applied. So before we get into those images, we're going to learn a little bit about our spectroscopy data, which hand that over to you.
Oh, thank you very much. All right. So spectroscopy data. So we've mentioned this a few times throughout the presentation, but now we're going to get into the nitty gritty and do a little back and forth comparison. So we're going to run through after this one, which I will discuss. We're going to have 3 additional spectroscopy files that we're going to talk about in tandem with the images as well, so we can get the comparison. So as we've discussed, all elements react to frequencies of light and emit specific wavelengths that can be analyzed and recorded. And that's what we've done with these spectroscopies. We've used this method of spectroscopy to analyze their samples and their chemical makeup to project and conclude what may have been present before, during, and after our experiments. Now, this process lets us assess their impact on dental health by observing their effects on the eggshell, which serves as a stand-in for human teeth and enamel, which we have clarified. So before we continue on, I want to talk a little bit about what these spectrophiles look like. So these may be familiar to some of you present, but others it may be as foreign as it was for us when we first looked at these. So as non-science people, speaking for my entire group, when we first saw files like this, we kind of standing dumbfounded. We have absolutely no clue what we're looking at. But eventually, with the help of our assisting teachers, Tracy and Bert, thank you guys very much, we were able to start to decipher this. So this file here is an example of an raw, unedited file that we have not messed with at all. This is of our control egg, so the all green image that we saw prior. So there is a number of different elements that you can see present on here that are spread throughout the graph. And it may be a little difficult to see the back of the room, but the horizontal axis here is a measurement of kilo electron volts, which is basically just the energy levels. And then the vertical is the counts of said element that is counted. So a higher proportion of a certain element in a given sample will mean a higher spike compared to the other ones. So some of these spikes you will see on the far right include such elements like cobalt. You can see rubidium over there. Moving over here, there's iridium, there is arsenic, there's vanadium. Now, when we first see these things, we thought, as I'm hoping you are thinking as well, that those are not things that we would commonly see on toothpaste nor want to see in our toothpaste, because any materials, particularly ones like vanadium that can be radioactive, are not so good for dental health. So this is a quality of spectroscopy files that we had to work with. There can be peaks that are detected that are false readings or misleading readings. So these ones over here, for example, where the peaks do not actually align with a rise in detection, that means that it's likely a false reading. So that was part of our analytical process we had to go through, which I'd like to refer to loosely as common sense and deductive reasoning. So some of these we can just right away go and say, obviously that's not an element present in the sample, such as vanadium. So that's not going to be there. And from that, like we'll see on the other files, we clean them up and we reduce them to only the elements present on the peaks that are detected. And then we can get into the analysis and conjecture afterwards. So from there, we'll continue on to the sample analysis. There we go.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Kepler. So yeah, again, this first sample is of our regular paste applied to the shell. So I know I kind of was a little bit confusing on accident. Our control egg was pictured in green originally, but the egg in this regular sample would be the red you see on the left there, and this whole wall of green, what looks like maybe little forests or little crumbs of broccoli, would be our regular toothpaste that ended up sticking to the shell. So that's after the brushing, that's after the equal amounts of rinsing and everything. Again, this is measured a little bit more of a macro view at 50 microns. Some cool observations that we made. We were able to, you may not be able to see it in the back, but there's some gaps here, especially on the right side, where you can still detect the egg right through. And this kind of went against our original hypothesis. The regular paste was actually the thickest of all the pastes, so we thought the thickest would lead to the most abrasion, but in fact, it was the least abrasive. So it had the most leftover, least surface abrasion, and it turned out to be the thickest. And again, the green magnesium, or the green phosphorus rather, sorry, and the black magnesium concentrated in the paste here also aligns with what we originally picked up from our first sample there. So yeah, that's the breakdown of the regular, at least from my view. Now Kepler will get more into it.
Yeah, and now we can do the compare and contrast. So then this is the matching spectra file for the regular sample. So this is now a version of a spectra file where it's cleaned up. There are no lines or element signals that do not line up with a peak. So now we can actually analyze what we see here that was properly detected. So as Josh mentioned, it is the least abrasive. So we've chosen to specifically highlight the silicon present here. So unfortunately for those of you present here, the slide bar is kind of in the way, but there is the smallest conceivable bump there. So that is evidence of a slight peak there for silicon readings, except it is incredibly small. So that supports the conclusion that it is a very low abrasive content, especially when you compare it to all the other peaks with other elements there. So a couple housekeeping details with this file and the other files that you will see is that the first spike here is always going to be carbon, and there is one of these for all the files that we will see. Now, we mentioned that the samples were placed on carbon tape when they went through the SEM. So the problem with this is that the elements that are detected, we don't know, specifically with carbon, we cannot tell if it is coming exclusively from the sample or from backscatter from the carbon tape or any other source present. So though we know there is carbon, we don't know what proportion of that is from the sample itself. So this influenced how we went through our analysis and assuming and trying to deduce what the carbon may have represented, what compounds they may have been a part of. So that's something we had to keep in mind. Similarly for the oxygen, oxygen was present, but it could come from a number of different sources, so we had to bear that in mind. And yeah, so the silicon present, we'll be able to compare that as we go through. But one thing that I mistakenly did when we started going through this analytical process that we will remedy towards the end is that the count axis on the side here to tell you how much was detected of each element. Comparing the length of the peaks, either in the count or relatively to the other peaks in the slide, and comparing those file to file is not a good way to do it, because the count scale changes from file to file because the samples we were using are different sizes, just like the images being different scales. So we had to keep that in mind and use a collective graph that analyzed the proportion of each sample and their content of the elements. So we'll get into that later, but yeah, I think for now we'll continue on to the next slide.
Yeah, so onto our next sample of egg. This one's treated with the charcoal paste. So again, if you look at the left color map there, you'll see there's still silica present, although not necessarily concentrated right in the middle. All around the outside, you can kind of see it all grouped up. We believe that is residue of the toothpaste, or maybe a combination of residue and shells. We can see all of our green background as well is still the eggshell measured with calcium. And then we also have our carbon as well in the yellow, sort of hanging around the red little silica pockets or just spread out throughout the surface of the shell. What's important to note is we can't really specifically tell whether those chunks of the eggshell were from us brushing or whether it was something that was like a micro break when we had to take our big pieces of eggs and bring them down to even smaller pieces of eggs. But we can see there are some particulates that kind of are similar to whitening in a lot of ways. They both have the higher concentration of silica and RDA. And unlike the regular toothpaste, at least in this section here, we see less evidence of paste being left over. Now, whether that part of the shell just got rinsed a little bit better than the regular one, or if it was just due to the charcoal paste being so much thinner than the regular paste, because when we did measure the paste as well, charcoal was definitely thinner than the regular one. And last but not least, the magnification, it's a little harder to tell, but we did as a group observe some little dark sort of splotches on the shell there too. We either thought that was just the natural porous structure of the egg or just more of the charcoal left behind. But the important things to notice are there is silica still left on the surface of the egg. So that's the biggest takeaway from that.
All right. So the spectra file for this one. So there are similar readings to the regular paste, but higher spikes. And I say higher spikes, and again, like I mentioned, that's relative based on the size, but there are different level of concentrations of certain elements, and I'll get into that. So, and this one is covering a larger area. I just want to prep you guys with this. The regular toothpaste sample spectra file was a more confined space. This is a bit larger. So silicon, you can see here again, the spike here has quite a larger spike in comparison, larger peak, sorry, with the other peaks in this specific file. So within here, we can tell that it was a much larger proportion of the entire makeup when compared to the other elements that were detected. So higher silicon reading. So this matched with our hypothesis and our expectations that we've discussed a little bit before, that the charcoal toothpaste would have a higher silicon reading and therefore a higher level of adhesion. And this matches with the RDA information that we've compared as well. And to the carbon again. Carbon spike is here, like I said, unreliable, semi. And one thing in addition to this sample that we can think of when we are talking about the carbon rather, is that the carbon could be the charcoal itself. So that is yet another source of potential, a potential source for picking up readings of carbon in addition to the carbon tape and the content of the toothpaste. So that is something we had to bear in mind, that a proportion of this should be allocated to the charcoal content as well.
Okay, and lastly, the whitening egg. So this may look a little similar to the charcoal toothpaste, and that does make sense. They both have higher silica concentration and RDA values. Looking at the color map first, we do see obviously the presence of silicon, just like in the charcoal egg. It's more spread out along the surface and not really concentrated in one big, one big collection of particulates like the regular paste was. We also have calcium, obviously, from the surface of the egg, and phosphorus as well, which was an ingredient that we found in the original analysis of the paste. So much like the charcoal egg, this is either just the natural porous structure of the egg itself or due to the abrasive nature of the paste. Again, this whole collection in the middle, there's a good chance that that is toothpaste, or that's a good chance that that is pieces of the eggshell and the paste, or like I said before, maybe just from us breaking the shell up into smaller pieces. But some more info that we kind of gained from this, we know it has the highest RDA value, like I said before, so that's kind of why we had our thinking geared more towards those splotches being due to adhesion. And yet the silica that is left behind, you can see it kind of mixed with what we believe to be either the original paste or just pieces of the shell. But yeah, it's important to note that the charcoal and the whitening samples are very, very similar, both measured at the same 10 micrometers as well. And yeah, both their higher RDA value and silica concentration kind of paints, I guess, a similar picture of what it looks like under the SEM.
All right, and the final spectra file we'll be looking at today for the whitening toothpaste. So I'll go right to the silicon readings again. So silicon we have marked here with our spike down here. So we can see that comparing the, I keep saying spike, peak, thank you. So again, when we compare the peak to the other peaks in this file alone, we can see that it is a reasonably high concentration, except not quite as similar as the readings in the charcoal sample were. The peak in the charcoal sample was very similar to the other peaks like like carbon or oxygen, for example. So the silicon reading in this sample was lower, respectively, with the other peaks in this individual file. So in this one and in the other files, spectra files we've talked about, there have been a consistent presence of calcium, phosphorus, and sodium. Now, this was expected. And one of the things that we went through during our analysis process afterwards was trying to figure out or trying to deduce what these may represent, what compounds they may have been a part of before or afterwards, and what purpose they served in the toothpaste. So we came up with a couple things. These are just a couple examples of things that we hypothesized could have been these, but we were not able to confirm these absolutely. Sodium phosphide is a compound used for tartar control. So the consistent presence of sodium and phosphorus in various levels in these samples, we theorized could be attributed to a source of tartar control, which we think would line up. So that was one of our leading thoughts there. Calcium phosphide also is something we thought could happen as well. Now, this would be kind of a opposite version to sodium phosphide. So calcium phosphide would represent tartar deposits, except these would be broken down after the process of scrubbing the sample with the various toothpastes. So that was one of our other leading theories, is that the calcium part of the calcium and phosphorus deposits could be remnants of such compounds that were intact before the experiment occurred, theoretically. And one last thing to note here is the sulfur reading that you can see here, and the very small peak, again blocked by the slide beam, but just a small little rise there. So sulfur was not present in nearly as high levels in the previous samples, but it wasn't here. And this is not uncommon. This is not unheard of. It looked a little strange to us initially because sulfur just sounds like something that we wouldn't want in our toothpaste. But upon our investigation, we learned that it is an ingredient in certain toothpastes in the form of sulfate, not just sulfur on its own. So various chemical compounds using sulfate that are present in toothpaste, such as whitening toothpaste, can be used for fighting plaque and general cleaning of the teeth. So we deduced this would make sense, and this adds up with whitening toothpaste being one where you're trying to clean the surface of the tooth, reduce plaque, similar to the other functions, but particularly for this one, we found that aligned with our expectations of the function of this particular toothpaste. All right. So this is a graph that we used, and Tracy helped me out with this, so I'll give you kudos for this. So this is a graph that allows us to actually compare the different proportions of the elements we detected sample to sample. Whereas previously we could only compare the peak levels in each individual sample, now we can compare them all together. So at the bottom we have our different sample titles, sensitive being regular, apologies for that, charcoal, whitening, and our control egg there. And then on the side here we have our percentage atoms. So basically each bar represents the entire composition of the sample of the elements that were detected, and then the different colored spaces indicate the proportion of that entirety that those individual elements took up. You can see on the side here, the legend here, there's a number of different elements that are listed that were commonly found in the samples, such as fluorine, magnesium, sulfur, potassium, sodium, calcium, phosphorus, and silicon. So control egg here, you will see this is without any toothpaste. You can see it is an overwhelming proportion of calcium there. That is expected. It's calcium carbonate. There should not be a large proportion of anything else. So that fit. I'm going to particularly focus on the silicon, just referencing this graph here. So that's the orange. On the sensitive, or the regular paste, sorry, that was the first one we looked at. So you can see it is a very small sliver at the bottom. This fits with the files that we've looked at. So silicon is present, but it's very low abrasive content when compared with the other samples there. So that lines up. Second place, silver medalist, we have whitening toothpaste with a higher level of silicon, so more abrasive, when compared with the other ones, but still the majority taken up by calcium and phosphorus in this particular sample. And finally, gold medalist charcoal has the most silicon present. And again, this lines up with our previous observations having the highest adhesion content. So this is an example of how you can compare the samples respectively and not being worried about misunderstanding the information that you've acquired.
Oxygen.
Thank you. Apologies. Thank you for that. So one thing that Tracy's reminded me of, and I almost just missed, is that initially with the spectra files, carbon and oxygen were two high peaks that were consistent in all the different files. Now, in this one, oxygen is not present on the side. You may have noticed that, you may have not. Apparently I missed that. So oxygen was present in these graphs, but oxygen has been removed because for every single sample, it accounted for approximately 3/4 of the entire proportion of the elements that were detected. So just for your information, the oxygen was present and was detected, but since it was such a high proportion and we're not absolutely sure where the readings were coming from, we decided to remove that so we can get a better idea of the proportions of the other elements in respect to each other. So that's why oxygen is missing. Thank you. We'll move on from there.
After hearing all these sciencey words, to bring it back all together, what we learned from the the silica concentration, spectroscopy revealed that different toothpaste brands containing various levels of silica, a common abrasive. This helps us understand how abrasiveness can affect your tooth enamel. Too much could wear over time. Next is spectroscopy data. We used light-based analysis to identify elements like silica and calcium in the toothpaste samples. Knowing this, the chemical makeup helps us think critically about the ingredients we use daily and their impact on our health. Adhesion of toothpaste. Some toothpaste formulas stuck more to the eggshell surface even after rinsing. This shows us how the toothpaste interacts with surfaces, which could affect how well it cleans or leaves behind residue in your mouth.
During this process, we had a lot of time of reflecting, and we thought of some changes that we would make if we were to do this project again. So the first would be our procedure. We would increase the rinsing and brushing time, especially because from looking at the pictures, we couldn't actually see the surface of the eggshell. So increasing the rinse time would hopefully rinse off all the residue of the toothpaste, and increasing the brush time would replicate the brushing of extended period of time. And then increasing the number of samples, we had kind of a time constraint, so we could only look at one sample per each toothpaste or one sample for each eggshell with the toothpaste on it. So just looking at more samples would help us see patterns and just really make those conclusions and solidify them. And then standardizing the brushing force and motion. We use the same person. I brushed all the eggshells, but I'm a person, I'm human, I'm not perfect, so there will be discrepancies there. And then with Indigenous perspectives, we have limited knowledge, and we did our best to incorporate some Indigenous perspectives into our inquiry question, but really seeking out advice from elders and knowledge keepers to find inquiry questions that are relevant to them, and including Indigenous communities in the process and collaborating them, as we are always looking to learn and continue incorporating voices and making sure that Indigenous voices are heard. And then our control materials, we used eggshells, which were pretty difficult to prepare. They're fragile and they're messy. And of course, using real teeth would make it a little bit more accurate, since that's what we're looking at as the effects on teeth. So maybe if we had more time exploring the ethical procedures to acquire those real human teeth.
All right, so one of the most important parts, arguably, about the inquiry process is reflecting on the journey and how you got to where you got. And a lot of us had to remind ourselves through this whole process that this isn't a science class for us. This is an inquiry class. So we're taking what we learned and hopefully are able to transplant that into our future students. So yeah, all of our reflections kind of followed some common themes, so we decided to group them into a couple categories. So mistakes lead to effective and reflective educators. So I was kind of on the fence about talking about this one for me personally, because it's a little embarrassing. But during our material prep there, you know, working with eggs, trying to get them into even pieces, it's kind of a messy job. So we taped them all up, and I have this scalpel. I'm just sawing at the egg, and sawing at the egg, and sawing at the egg for what seems like, I'd say what seems like hours realistically is probably only a couple minutes, but until Jess came up to me and was like, Josh, are you sure that scalpel is sharp? And turns out it wasn't. It was very, very dull. So a lesson that I learned from that was always make sure you have your materials prepped and ready to go. That's good for if you're working in a science place like this, or even if you're in the classroom, you always got to make sure you have your materials ready to go and take constructive criticism. Like I could have thrown a fit and got embarrassed and left for the rest of the day, but I took what Jess said to heart, and that helped us get through the eggshells a lot quicker. And I don't know, one sort of thing, it may sound a little cheesy, but I kind of thought of this earlier, is we got to make sure our students' scalpels are always sharp. So if they're trying at a problem with a dull scalpel, they're not going to get anywhere. They're just going to get frustrated. So yeah, that mistake kind of led to that sort of revelation. So I felt that was kind of important too.
Yeah, and on a broader in a broader conversation as far as our like teaching perspectives are concerned. So we can take these lessons and apply them to our future classrooms and how we might teach kids ourselves. So learning from our mistakes is obviously a huge part of anybody's lives, in personally or professionally, but teaching obviously is a huge fact for us to really keep in mind and be conscious of what we're going through. Because being conscious of our mistakes and learning from them, taking feedback from people really boosts our effectiveness as a teacher, and that's what we all strive to do with our students. So, for example, teaching methods and strategies which are related to teaching pedagogy, that's one of the terms we talked about before. So many of us, I speak more personally, but I know a lot of other people in the profession, if they are ever able to teach a topic or talk about a topic that they are very passionate about and know a lot about, as I'm sure plenty of you have done before, it's a lot easier and sometimes feels comfortable to people to stand up in front like we're doing now and go through a presentation and lecture and talk, and you can get lots of information out that way. However, especially for some students, particularly younger students or more impatient students that a lot of the times don't give you the time of day, they need engaging strategies and processes. And that's part of our job as teachers, is to try different strategies to approach teaching, feed the information at the kids, see what works, see what doesn't, take that feedback and work our strategies to see how we can best reach them and get the information and understanding towards them. So that's how we can relate this to our classrooms.
All right, and regarding inquiry building resilience, on our lab day, there were lots of hands-on jobs to be done, and I was very uncomfortable with that, so I was the first to raise my hand and volunteer to take notes, because you can't mess up writing things down, right? So that was the job that I volunteered for because I was uncomfortable, and I didn't want to mess things up, even though mess up cutting an eggshell, that's okay, but I was scared. So through the term, I made a conscious effort to push myself into more hands-on roles and into more active roles in discussions. And through that, I learned the importance of resilience, stepping beyond that initial hesitation, and being willing to make mistakes and learning things and embracing the challenges that come with it. So
during our first class of the semester, there was one thing that I think I shared, that I was a chronic perfectionist, and I hate when I don't know things, and I hate getting questions wrong. But I knew coming into this that I was probably going to be like way at the bottom and I was not going to know anything, and that was the case. And that really helped me. And there were some cases of, these common sense things that you think you should know. I think Kepler mentioned about why would there be arsenic in our toothpaste? And I'm like, I don't know, maybe there is. There's I had to learn that it's okay for me to ask that question, because it might not actually be common sense that there's not arsenic in our toothpaste.
Granted.
So that really helped me build resilience, and I feel way more comfortable now being able to ask questions that I might think are stupid.
So in regards to planning carefully and adapting constantly, during this process, it quickly became clear that planning was going to be a very key part of making sure that we were interpreting our data and following our procedures properly. However, despite all of our preparation, there were still some unforeseen circumstances that we had to adapt to. The one that I remember most being our sample sizes. We spent all of this time in the lab cutting the eggs and putting them into quarters, and then we get to the day where we're analyzing this data using the scanning electron microscope, and we were told that these samples were way too large. So we had to break them into much smaller pieces so that they could fit into the microscope. This luckily didn't affect our data or our results in any way, but did reinforce adaptation and flexibility to me. One thing as teachers that we need to be able to do is adapt to our students' needs and to adapt to the school's timeline to make sure that we're providing students with all of the data and information that they need to be successful within the next grade, the next year, and outside of school.
Yeah, as we said, there was a lot of adapting during the process, but towards the end, we looked at our photos, our SEM images, and we realized we can't even see the surface of the eggshell. So we had to shift our question into instead looking at the surface of the eggshell and the damage, looking at the adhesion and maybe the residue that was left over. So that just showed we planned, we went through all the steps, we did everything we thought we could, and we still had to shift our question and adapt to the data that we took. And that just goes with being a teacher. Sometimes you take all the steps to plan those perfect lessons, and you think you'll really hit the mark with your students, and then the day comes and they're just not feeling it that day, and you have to switch on an instant and adapt to the needs of your students. So this really gave us the confidence that we can adapt when needed, and we'll be able to do that in the classroom.
Awesome. So our acknowledgements, we would like to thank the Canadian Light Source and their wonderful staff for the resources and collaboration we received to make this project possible. We'd also like to send out a special thank you to Burke Barlow for his guidance and providing his expertise and allowing us to use the Electron Imaging and Microscopy Lab and the SEM. We would also like to thank Tracy Walker for supporting us through this process and helping to teach us about inquiry as future educators. There you go.
Thank
you.
All right.
Oh,
Yeah, please.
I'm unclear about your egg. Was it a raw egg, boiled egg, and did you brush the egg while it was intact, or you brushed the shell after? Like, I'm unclear what your sample really was.
We had raw eggs. We cut them, drained the insides, and then rinsed them, brushed them.
Yeah, we did not cook the eggs at all. We just took them raw, and because we didn't want to put them through any process that might have changed the makeup of the surface of the egg. We just wanted to work with them with as little damage to them as we possibly could. So we felt raw eggs would be the best for them.
Why do you think raw eggs are better than boiled eggs? You don't know which one approximates the tooth anyways, so.
Yeah, I think our thinking behind that was, since we didn't have as much time as we could because that's one of the things we could have done with perhaps more time and longer access, is used various different kinds of eggshells as far as preparedness. So you can go raw eggs, boiled eggs, something like that. We could have tried a bunch of different surfaces and seen the differences, but since we only had such limited time, we had to only use one kind of sample, and we thought that would be the best version to go. But that's something in the future we could have done, is provided that analysis beforehand.
We just didn't want to interfere with the material as much as possible. We wanted to leave it be.
And throughout this process, we were also working on a very quick timeline. Typically, these courses, they're 13 weeks, and I think we had one less week than normal. Yeah. So there was also just a little bit less time to do some more of that research that we would have liked to have done.
Especially since we are only here once a week. So we don't have a lot of repeated sessions each week to come back and continue research. So that was something as well we had to overcome. Any other questions from anybody?
When you're doing the imaging, I noticed you used a fairly large scale set. Did you try to go in really high magnification to see what you can see there, or is it just all blurry or like that? Or just kind of try to find a good scale that you got really nice pictures?
Yeah, it was kind of a balance between like trying to find, like especially for like looking at the adhesion, we wanted to see like where we could still see the toothpaste compared to the surface of the egg. But I mean, if we had more time, we could have taken a lot more images, a lot more in depth for sure.
Yeah, and it is a bit of both. So we have plenty more images that we did show you. The spectroscopy files, we had fewer of those, so you got to see the majority of those. But the images that we were showing, there were a lot more that went down to smaller magnifications. But for the viewing purposes, we chose ones where we could kind of just present the most contrasting elements and everything like that. So we did get a variety of photos. We did not show them all in the presentation though.
So you were able to like look around and try to find the best areas kind of thing.
Yeah.
And were you able to see any like things that looked like abrasion or like scratches or anything like that?
Oh, well, there was one that looked like it might have got a little bit, well, it's hard to tell because like we should have maybe looked before we brushed it to see that, because I think even with our control egg, we did brush it with the toothbrush first.
No, I just
No?
Yeah, just rinsed, yeah.
Yeah. So we did see some things, except it was a little difficult to be completely 100% confident about what those represented. So I think there was one photo that we didn't show that did show what we assumed was a significant fault line and damage to an eggshell, except we weren't 100% certain what that was or what it was caused by, and we don't think we ended up showing that one.
Yeah, the abrasion we saw on the eggs could have been caused by our sawing them apart. It could have been breaking them into the smaller pieces. It could have been the toothpaste, but unfortunately, without having more time to actually look at things a little bit closer, it was really hard to differentiate.
But yeah, things like the element, like the concentration on the spectroscopy files, we are able to analyze the amount of silicon. So that gives us a more confident observation about level of adhesion there. But the visuals were a little trickier to be confident about our analysis.
Especially when you get all like the colors in there too, trying to pick up all the different elements, it kind of bogs it down sometimes a little bit.
Hopefully
Yeah.
that answers.
What was your favorite part of the project?
My favorite part of the project was just meeting all of these people and working with them and working with Tracy and working with Burke and just being able to come into this building and have that intimidation factor, but then pushing through it and showing that resilience and perseverance, and then just, yeah, trying something that I would have never expected doing in my life or career.
Yeah, when we signed up for this class, we didn't know that it was at the light source. We just signed up for ECUR 411, and we showed up on day one, and Tracy's like, "We're doing science stuff." Great. So the best part was like the initial like, what are we gonna do? And then now we're here confidently talking about spectra and silicon and all those fancy words. So
Yeah, I really liked being able to choose what we learned about. Yeah, it's a big thing in education is letting your students like take ownership of their learning, and that's what we actually got to do and practice what we're preaching. So
And for me personally, I love being a little lab coat, my glasses, my gloves. Like, I felt like a real scientist. Getting a badge with my face on it. I think that was pretty cool. It was, I think, it's an experience that I don't think I would have ever gotten. And I'm really happy that I have that experience.
What was the pixel size of your data?
Not
the scale, the pixel size of your,
It looked like on the software on the
for your images. You show a scale there, but that's not pixel size. Like how small pixel size did you look at?
Based on the NanoView software, I don't know, the magnification said 3x3, so whatever that would be on that software. Again, I don't really know the ins and
Yeah,
outs.
I think we got some of that data, except we didn't use it in our presentation, and I don't have that off the top of my head. We did collect various information on data from our files, except we didn't show all of that in here. So I apologize, but I don't know that off the top of my head. We might be able to figure that out.
Say confident. I don't know.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, at present, we're not sure.
You can.
Yeah, we have the information we can access, but we don't.
The maps they showed are made with a viewer that Dennis coded for online viewing. The actual image files would have that on the bottom. but they didn't show any, and I can't remember.
And it was 5 nanometers, 100 nanometers.
It would depend on the magnification. There's different magnification. If you're really interested,
No,
I can tell you. Just
Okay, there's a question on YouTube. It's from Dallas Pelly, and he's wondering, did you engage with Indigenous knowledge keepers during the research? And how could you specifically incorporate their perspectives and voices in the process? He does comment that it's a great presentation overall, with a big smiley face.
Yeah. So like I was saying before, we did not, and that's what we would change if we went back and did it again. That was something that I know I personally struggled with. I didn't want it to be not genuine and just adding in a perspective just to check a box or something. So now we learned, building relationships and seeking out advice from knowledge keepers or elders would be a great way to do that and learn a lot from that.
Thank you for the question. Yeah.
Okay. I have one last question for you. I told you I would reserve the last one. So recognizing that we used science as our experience focus because we have access to that. Most of you are unlikely to be teaching high school science. Most of you are going to be looking at elementary classrooms where you will be including some science likely. So considering that, what is the one thing that you personally will be taking away from a pedagogy or a personal perspective from this experience overall? That's helpful.
Something for me in my personal teaching philosophy, relationships are central to all of my teaching. And the way that you fostered a relationship with us in the beginning, getting us to talk about our feelings and to express our concerns and things is something in a sciencey classroom. I know science and math both can be very intimidating for students. And sometimes you'll hear students say with science and math, well, I'm just stupid. It's not that they're stupid. It makes them feel that way because they don't feel comfortable. But creating a classroom environment like you did for us is my biggest takeaway and how important that is in a science and math kind of environment, in a STEM environment, really. So that's my biggest takeaway from this class is how to do that. It was played out beautifully by you for us, so now I can do that for my students.
Yeah, I'm going with that. It's always a good thing to create that environment where students feel comfortable, but encouraging those questions and encouraging that mistakes are a part of growth. I know one of the biggest barriers for a lot of kids in, science or math is they're scared to be like, why are you doing that? What is this process? Or, they just don't want to ask those questions. And for me, that's the times that I learn the most. So, encouraging that collaborative, the curious attitudes from my students would be my biggest takeaway.
And kind of going along with all of that, it's like Tracy was a big advocate for, if you don't know it, let's look it up. And that's something where I'm like, oh, I don't need to know it. I can just look it up. That's pretty cool. It made me feel like, even though I don't have that knowledge in my head, it's okay to just see it in another place.
My biggest takeaway, I think, would have been just how important that hands-on learning is and how it is important to just get involved and actually invest yourself into what you're doing. And that might be spending time in the lab. That might be asking as many questions as you can when you're in a room with Burke and a scanning electron microscope. But it really is just making sure that you're taking that accountability and you're also teaching your students how to take that accountability, how to get involved and even excited about what they're doing, and just not to be afraid to ask those questions and then seek those answers.
Yeah, I think biggest takeaway for me is probably structuring a classroom so it's less of a dictatorship as far as outlining every move that your students have to make piece by piece, step by step, and trying to have more of a guiding hand as a supervisor. So give them the information, give them the outline of what the purpose of this a given classes, a given course, a given topic, and what the important topics are, but then giving them the freedom to conduct their own investigation, work with the peers, and come to their own conclusions without the direct oversight of the teacher at all times. So an enhanced level of freedom for my classrooms is probably the biggest takeaway for me for educational pedagogy purposes.
For me, it would be just the inquiry process in general and all of the intricacies that go in with it. I personally believe that knowledge and the process of learning isn't just concentrated into like one subject. The inquiry process is a valuable process for all subjects. The ability or the courage or the structure, providing the structure to be able to try and pursue something, even if it doesn't work, you can take another angle, see how it gets there. And that sort of ties into like holistic education, meeting the student with where they're at. Just, inquiry builds creativity and passion for learning. So being able to take that from a science kind of based class and put it into, say, like my future social studies classroom or ELA classroom, I think would be very, very beneficial because, yeah, it's not just limited to science, it's a learning process.
Thank you all very much. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you those of you online.
And that's it.
Yes. Yeah, thank you.